Star Wars only, I don't know what the fuck your problem is.
George Lucas still wanted to have control over Star Wars, even after selling the company Lucasfilm to Disney. Even after selling the franchise Star Wars to Disney, he still wanted to have a say in the story. And to be fair, he does have a say as a creative consultant and whatnot, but he really wanted to be able to finish the story on his own terms. And it's one of those questions we have to ask ourselves where, is it really something that we should have let happen? Should we have let Lucas, and not us the audience as fans, and we don't really have a say in this matter, but should Lucas have been able to sell his franchise, but also finish the story that he wanted to tell? I think it's a little bit of wishful thinking on Lucas's part, if we're being honest. I think it's a little bit much of having the cake and eating it too, if you will. You can't sell your company for $4 billion and then still want to control the films that your company makes. It's kind of ironic in a way. Lucas has been the filmmaker from the 70s and 60s that would deny the big Hollywood studio system. He never wanted to be a part of that system. He even made American Zoetrope with his good friend Francis Ford Coppola, his mentor in the film industry. But then he sells his company, his franchise, his legacy Star Wars to the biggest studio that we have nowadays, and that is Disney. Disney is the big studio, and I think it's just kind of ironic that we started Star Wars trying to be separate from the Hollywood scene, separate from the big studio business, but he sold it to that very same business. But besides the point, that's not the point of this video. Why did Lucas still want to have control over Star Wars after selling the franchise? Simply because it is his legacy, it is his life's work. I think we would have a different story here if Lucas didn't come back and write and direct every single prequel movie when he came back in the late 90s to start working on Star Wars again. He had a choice. He could have done more Star Wars films, or he could have done different kind of films. He could have done his experimental films, films that I think, and I know his mentor Francis Ford Coppola would agree with me, robbed us. We really were robbed the filmmaker that George Lucas could have been because of Star Wars, but that is besides the point. He wanted to sell the franchise but keep control. He wanted to sell the franchise to the biggest studio out there and not be an employee of Disney, but still make his films the way he wanted to make them. And if that's the case, you have to go, well, George, why didn't you just keep the movies, keep the franchise, and finish the trilogy and finish the films yourself? And that's where I think the thought process might be a little confusing when you look at someone like George Lucas. What was the idea behind there? Did he think that the sequel trilogy that he would make would not have been financially successful? Does he think he needed a better producer behind the team? I mean, who would have produced the movies as well? Would he brought Rick McCallum back in? We really don't know what the game plan would have been for his sequel trilogy. What we do know, and what I know for sure, is that he was planning on making that sequel trilogy himself before Disney even came in. He was kind of getting into that process. He was getting into the process of obviously writing the story outlines for it. And that would have finished the Star Wars story in the way that Lucas wanted to finish it. And if you remember the James Cameron interview that he did with AMC, where he said that his sequel trilogy would have focused on the midichlorians and the Wills, and I really was interested in that aspect of it, because I don't like the midichlorians. I think that was a big mistake with the prequels, but I do like the idea of the Wills. That's been something that we've been talking about since the 70s. I like thinking about the mythology and the mythos of the Star Wars universe, and the Wills are a big part of that. And if Lucas had kept the rights, he would have finished the story with the Wills, with the midichlorians. And he did say in a James Cameron interview that it was going to be a not well-received film from the fans. He said the fans would have hated it like they hated The Phantom Menace specifically. But the story would have been a full circle. It would have been complete. And it's pretty obvious that the Star Wars sequels that we have now from Disney are not going to be interested in the midichlorians or the Wills or anything like that. We're on the final film of the episodic saga with The Rise of Skywalker. And from my point of view, from the outside looking in, I haven't seen the film yet, but it's obvious that Episode 9 is not going to involve the Wills or the midichlorians or anything like that. Which, sure, you know, you pick your direction on how you want to make your films, but it still is an interesting question on, should George have been able to sell the franchise and keep that creative control? I don't think so. I think he was asking for a little too much in that situation. That doesn't mean, though, I don't think he should have been a writer or written the story for the sequel trilogy. I think George is a great producer. I think he's a far better producer than he is a writer, and I think he's a far better director than he is a writer as well. So it didn't make much sense to me why he came back to the prequel trilogy and wrote and directed every single one, when in the original trilogy, what he did great, what he did best with, is having directors and producers like Irvin Kershner and Gary Kurtz specifically challenge him on some of his story ideas, and they really actually benefited him in a lot of ways. And I think that if he would have had that opportunity with Disney, if he would have had that opportunity with a different producer or someone to write the story and write the script, or specifically the screenplay, if someone would just write the screenplay for his movies, I think it would have gone a lot better. And I think if he had that for the sequel trilogy, things would have gotten better. I think there should have been a little bit more of a compromise on the end of Disney and Lucasfilm, on the deal that they had, at least, when selling the franchise. I think that they should have at least let Lucas finish the story the way he wanted it to be finished, but of course Disney could challenge him on some of those story ideas and say, alright George, it's not a bad idea. The midichlorians weren't well received though, why don't we just focus on the Whills? Why don't we forget the midichlorians in that microbiotic universe and focus on the Whills? Just something different. You could bring in Michael Arden, you could have him be a co-writer with Lucas, or have JJ direct the film. I have no problem with Lucas not writing and directing the Star Wars sequel trilogy. I do have a problem, however, though, completely getting rid of the idea that the man had, because, like it or not, it is a story. It is a story that he started, but a lot of fans like to make it seem like, oh, well, since it's his story and he started it, he should have 110% full say on it and never get any criticism on it. I don't like that narrative. I don't like that idea. Star Wars is at its best when you have collaborative minds like George Lucas, and back in the 70s his wife Marcia was a big help in terms of the story and the development of the films and the editing specifically. But you also had someone like Gary Kurtz, who was a great producer, who I think a lot of Star Wars fans forget and don't remember because they simply don't know the history. But Gary Kurtz was very influential in how the films came out and the story and the directions that they came. And you also have the Irvin Kershner director for Empire Strikes Back, who is the best Star Wars director that we've had since ever. I mean, he is the best Star Wars director ever. And I miss that. I miss the collaborative effort that you have in these films. And they feel a little lacking in the sequel trilogy. And they're missing that Lucas magic. I mean, Lucas really does have that creative mind that you can tell when you watch the prequels and the original trilogy. The ideas are amazing, they just have to be executed properly. The dialogue has to be written properly. And that's where you can bring in a co-writer. That's where you can bring in someone for the screenplay. And I would have been completely happy if they would have finished the story that Lucas started, even after he sold the franchise to Disney. Even after selling Star Wars to Disney, I would have been okay with Lucas using the story treatments that he had, using those, but letting someone else write the screenplay, work on the dialogue, have someone like J.J. Abrams come in, direct the films. Completely fine with that entire scenario. But I think the story would have been a lot more cohesive and complete, because Lucas has that magic touch when it comes to Star Wars. You see that in the prequels, you see that in the original trilogy. A lot of the creative aspects of those films come from that man's mind. And I believe it was Simon Pegg who said, even with the sequel trilogy, he's involved with the sequel trilogy, and I think he's a consultant for Episode 9, he said that the sequels are missing that Lucas touch. The magical aspect that Lucas has when it comes to world building is kind of lacking in these new films. And like Lucas said when he saw The Force Awakens, there's nothing new to it. It's a story we've already seen before. And I understand what Disney was trying to do, but yet again, as I said in a past video or two, it's basically the difference between a filmmaker like Lucas, who really doesn't care what the fans think. I mean, if we're going to be honest, I know a lot of us fans get really passionate and really die hard about Star Wars. Lucas couldn't give less of a fuck, alright? He just wants to tell a story. He's not trying to be a fan service kind of person. He's not trying to please everybody. He just wants to tell the story that he wants to tell. But I think the story can always be evolved from Lucas's mind if you have other collaborative people around him, like Irvin Kershner and like Gary Kurtz, who can really challenge Lucas and make the story better. Empire Strikes Back is still the best Star Wars film of all time, and that's the one that Lucas didn't direct. That's the one where Irvin Kershner took over and did a lot of the directing, and that Lucas didn't agree with every decision that Irvin made when it came to that film. But that's okay, because it was for the better. It's nice to have collaborative efforts on these films, and I think that we're missing that, not only with the prequel trilogy, that was obviously lacking in the prequel trilogy, but even with the sequels. I feel like the collaboration that you have with the sequels isn't at the point where it could have been like you have with the original trilogy, where you have these challenging ideas between the writers, the producers, and directors to come out with this brand new story that we've never seen before. And since you have a company running Star Wars now, you have the big studio that I was talking about earlier, the biggest studio we have in the world now. running the franchise, it's almost like, what would you expect? What did you expect here, George? What did you expect when you were going to sell the company for $4 billion? Did you really think they were going to let you keep the key to the house and still have a say on how you're going to paint it? I think George is a little bit of the king of wishful thinking, if you remember that song from the late 90s. It's having your cake and eating it too. And it's really one of those things where if George truly wanted to finish the story the way he wanted to finish it, why would you sell the franchise in the first place? Why did you make the call? Don't forget, I know a lot of people like to say Disney tricked him or manipulated him into doing it and stole the franchise from him. If someone says that, they're being stupid. George made the call. He knew what he was doing. Doesn't mean I agree with the decision that he made. I do think he got a little bamboozled in a sense, but still, why would you sell the franchise and want to have complete creative control over it? And did you really think that was going to happen, George? It sadly wasn't. But it doesn't mean he wasn't wrong for wanting some more say in the matter. But tell me your thoughts below. What do you think about this? Should George have kept that creative control even after selling the franchise? Or if he was that set in stone on keeping the creative control, should he have just kept the franchise and done it himself? Tell me your thoughts below. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this matter. I'm Star Wars Only. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you all next time, and may the Force be with you always.